Welcome to Rooftop. My name is Matt. In modern criminal justice systems, one of the most fundamental principles of law is that the punishment should fit the crime. Ever heard that phrase? This principle is actually partly derived from the Old Testament law of Moses, in which the Israelites were allowed to take an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, life for a life, but not much more than that. You couldn't take a life for an eye, or 2 legs for a tooth, or a torso for a nose, or anything like that. Now, the logic of this sort of retributive justice system is twofold. First of all, it punishes the wrong in a way that is fair and appropriate. The consequences of me taking your life is that you, or probably a family member, get to take mine. Only fair. But secondly, the principle of the punishment meeting the crime is designed to protect the who? The criminal. When someone runs over your poodle with their scooter, it's easy for you to want to blow up their house. I mean, they ran over your poodle. But that wouldn't be fair. Running over their poodle would be fair, but not blowing up their house. This is why so many people are upset at what's happening in the UK. Following the riots in London, the government is coming very hard down on the rioters. They're trying to send a message that violence, mayhem, social anarchy will not be tolerated at all. And to make their point, they are taking names, and even petty crimes are being punished most severely. I don't know if you saw this in the video, but a lady is doing 5 months in the pen for receiving a pair of stolen shorts. 2 hoodlums are being locked up for a long time for trying to set up a riot on Facebook that never actually took place. Britain is outraged. These punishments are far out of proportion to their crimes. I mean, if you want to be fair, okay, take the shorts back, go steal a pair of hers. Don't toss her in the can for 5 months. Government says that these criminals aren't petty crooks. They are rioters. That is no small crime. They are participating in an anarchic, violent attempt to destabilize society for millions of peace-loving citizens. That's a big deal. If the masses are not sated, it violates our most basic legal and moral instinct to subject someone to long-lasting punishment for relatively minor offenses. Perhaps you see where I'm going with this. In recent years, God has come under even greater public legal scrutiny. How can God send anyone to hell forever for comparatively minor crimes while committed on earth? How could he torture anyone forever in hell for committing sins here on earth that in the grand scheme of things aren't all that bad? For someone who came up with the eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth law in the first place, which he did, doesn't this eternal punishment thing seem a bit hypocritical? How could God do this? And if he does this mean, vengeful, hypocritical, violent sort of God even deserve to be worshipped? Well, we're studying hell right now at Rooftop, and we're talking about common questions people have about eternal punishment. Questions like, is hell real? Why don't people believe in hell anymore? What's hell like? Who goes to hell? But so far, we've skipped one of the biggies, which we're going to tackle this morning. The question is, how can a loving God send people to hell? This is the Christian church's traditional understanding of God and hell. Church believes that hell is real, that hell is terrible, that hell is forever. But the church also believes that God sends people there. Our loving, gracious, kind, compassionate, enduring God sends people to hell. In fact, the Bible just doesn't say that God sends people to hell. Like, he puts them in a taxi and pays the fare and sends them there. The Bible doesn't say he sends people to hell like that. The Bible actually says God throws people into hell. He casts them into hell. Like a baseball, he throws them there. Jesus says in Luke 12, for example, do not fear those who kill the body, and after that have nothing more that they can do, but fear God, who, after he has killed, has authority to cast into hell, ! Yes, I tell you, fear him. So make no mistake, Jesus says that our loving and gracious God throws people into hell and that we should be afraid of him. Obviously, this has bothered plenty of people, especially in modern times. For starters, it seems unfair that people would receive everlasting punishment for temporal crimes. I mean, how fair is it? I've lived imperfectly for however many years I end up living, 75, 80 years if I'm blessed, however long I end up living. How fair is it that I live imperfectly for 75 years or so and that I suffer in hell for all eternity because of my earthly crimes? It's why one atheist, a guy named B.C. Johnson, said this about hell. He said, the idea of hell is morally absurd. Doesn't make sense. It's not fair. And also, hell seems to impugn the character of God. What kind of God would torture people in hell forever? Do we really want to worship that kind of God? There's a very famous agnostic named Charles Templeton. Anybody ever heard of Charles Templeton? Charles Templeton was a very religious person for a long time until he decided he didn't actually believe everything he thought he did, and hell was a big hang-up for him. Here's what he said in an interview once about hell. He said, I wouldn't hold someone's hand to a fire for a moment, not an instant. How could a loving God, just because you don't obey him and do what he wants, torture you forever, not allowing you to die, but to continue in that pain for eternity? Listen to this last point. There is no criminal who would do this. So are we really prepared to worship a God who is more vengeful and violent than the worst known criminal? Big question for lots of people. How could a loving God send people to hell? Well, the first thing we got to do here, in order to answer the question, is clear away some of the emotion and the exaggerations often associated with the question. For example, a lot of times the question, how could God send people to hell, is phrased like this. How could God torture people in hell? And if the question is, how can God torture people in hell, there's an easy answer. What's the answer? He doesn't. It's a loaded question. It's like asking when you stop beating your wife. How do you answer that question? You can't really answer it. It's designed to trap you. I never said that God tortures people in hell. Jesus never says God tortures people in hell. The Bible never says God tortures people in hell. Even casting someone into hell is very different than torturing them in hell by pulling out their fingernails and burning them slowly with cigarette butts. Just because prison is a terrible place doesn't mean that the judge who sent a prisoner there is the one in the jail cell causing all those terrible things to happen. So if the question, how could God torture anyone in hell, the question, how could God torture anyone in hell, is a loaded argumentative question designed to trap you. God is not a torturer. Yes, he sends people to hell, but just because it's a terrible place doesn't mean that God is doing all the terrible things. There is still a question here, though, that deserves an answer. Even though the Bible doesn't say that God personally inflicts people with never-ending pain in hell, it does say that God sends people there and is justified in doing so. How could he be justified in doing so? How could a loving God send people to hell forever? I have how many answers to that question for you this morning? 3. How could God send people to hell? For starters, with great reluctance. How could God send people to hell? Reluctantly. In the book of Ezekiel, God tells the prophet to tell the people, "As I live, declares the Lord God, I have no pleasure in the death of the wicked, but that the wicked turn from his way and live. Turn back from your evil ways. For why will you die, O house of Israel?" Yes, the Bible says that God sends people to hell, but that doesn't mean he's happy to do it. It doesn't mean he's laughing maniacally in heaven as he throws people into the pit. It just means that he's determined to render justice. I mean, in terms of how God feels as it's happening, we know how he feels. He has just told us, I take no pleasure in the death of the wicked. The other night, for example, I had to send my daughter to bed without dinner. She would not clean her room, even though I gave her very explicit instructions and numerous opportunities to do so. When she refused, I gave her the punishment and I cast her into bed. She cried and she screamed. She cried and she screamed a very long time. I thought she would never stop. I was not down in the living room smiling and enjoying it. I was not laughing maniacally. She's hungry. She's suffering. That was not my reaction. I mean, I could hear her screams pouring down the stairs, rolling down the stairs. I felt terrible. I was sad. I was mad. I was mad that this had to happen. I mean, I gave her every opportunity to avoid it. I was very clear about the consequences. I spoke in 3-year-old terms. Clean your room. Watch what I am doing. Do this with me. I gave her 2 little boy helpers to assist in the process. I told her, this is what's going to happen if you don't put away your things. You are not going to eat food. Your stomach will be empty, and you will go to bed without eating. And I only cast her into bed when she proved once and for all by her actions that she actually preferred the punishment over the reward. God does the same. He endures, he works, he weeps. He takes no pleasure in the death of the wicked. In fact, I really like Ezekiel's language here. What does Ezekiel say? Turn back. Turn back from your wicked ways. This is how God feels about hell. In his book, Whatever Happened to Hell, catchy title, John Blanchard describes a true story of a multi-auto pileup in dense fog on a major highway outside of London. And I want to read to you the way he describes it. As he writes, the hazard warning lights were on, but were ignored by most drivers. At 6:15 a.m., a lorry carrying huge rolls of paper was involved in an accident. And within minutes, the carriageway was engulfed in carnage. Dozens of cars were wrecked. 10 people were killed. A police patrol car was soon on the scene, and 2 policemen ran back up the motorway to stop oncoming traffic. They waved their arms and shouted as loud as they could, but most drivers took no notice and raced on towards the disaster that awaited them. The policemen then picked up traffic cones and flung them at the car's windscreens in a desperate attempt to warn drivers of their danger. One told how tears streamed down his face as car after car after car went by, and he waited for the sickening sound of impact as they hit the growing mass of wreckage farther down the road. You want to know how God feels about hell? Turn back